This is the 2025 Federal Leaders Debate. You about housing, which over the past decade has gone from a problem to a crisis while the Liberals were in power.
No, we're seeing climate crisis in front of us happening right now.
The fentanyl crisis is a very serious issue.
And one crisis we have is in immigration.
We're in a healthcare crisis right now,
which led to the worst inflation crisis in a generation.
Well, that means the fentanyl crisis.
Because of the housing crisis.
And trust, sadly, to deal with the housing crisis when
Leading in a crisis.
moms that have lost their children to this opioid overdose crisis.
You say that you are a great crisis manager.
Is you need to respond in a crisis.
And a crisis that is hurting people across this country. People
Here, which is have a result in crisis.
I don't believe that's the right way to manage a crisis.
That I can deliver for this country coming out of this crisis. And what is at stake here?
we're living in a climate crisis. So
In a crisis, you got to plan for the worst.
This is about crises and leadership.
and now we're seeing heat crises in communities that never had.
In the context of leading in a crisis.
And the other major international crisis facing the world.
We need to respond to this serious crisis in our country with care and compassion.
In a crisis, yes, you need a team.
At a time when it is in crisis, I think it is wrong.
And we start dealing with this crisis together because
Surely constitutes a crisis.
We're in a serious crisis.
Contribute to ending that crisis in this country.
Public safety concerns around the overdose crisis.
Leading in a time of crisis.
And a crisis,
Crises.
In a crisis.
overdose crisis. The
Crisis.
And one crisis.
serious crisis.
A crisis.
It is in crisis. I think
In that crisis.
serious crisis
fentanyl crisis.
in a climate crisis. So
In a crisis,
a crisis right now.
Fentanyl crisis.
Climate crisis,
because of the housing crisis.
To a crisis.
Crisis, yes.
heat crises, and
Major crisis.
In crisis.
overdose crisis.
This is crazy. Do we want to elect them to a fourth term?